FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today is February 14th, 2017. Well, we just got the news that Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who is the President's National Security Advisor, just stepped down. And who's coming next? Well, there was a temporary appointment of his deputy. We don't know who the permanent person will be yet, but here to discuss it is Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow and Director, Center on Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute. And Ivan, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Hey, so this whole Flynn imbroglio, it just started kind of from before his appointment. And it just kept growing and growing. And finally, I guess he just became too big a liability and he had to go, right?
Right. Well, I think, you can't argue with trying to improve relations with Russia. I mean, you can, and some Republicans do, but I think, everybody thinks that they ought to make at least one last attempt to improve relations with Russia. So that's not really the issue. And he was a champion of that policy, but he may have gone too far in discussions with the Russians before he took off. He took office with Trump. In other words, he was representing the president-elect rather than the president. And that's where he ran into problems because the government the United States is supposed to have one government at a time, and also the second issue is he also apparently lied to Vice President Pence and maybe other administration officials about what he was doing.
Yeah, you got to wonder, at the very least, that's exceedingly poor judgment, especially when we know from Snowden that everything is getting recorded. Certainly any conversations between the U.S. and Russia are getting recorded here.
And he was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So he was a higher up in the U.S. intelligence community. So he, above all people, should have known that, right? So I'm not sure. Maybe he didn't think he was doing anything wrong, but it's the real question, the larger question here, which just leads to, unfortunately for Trump, is because of this hacking allegation is. Was there a quid pro quo, a wink and a nudge saying, well, we can't hack into the Democratic computers, but you can, Russia. And if you do, we'll take off the sanctions when we get into office. That's the question that everybody's really wondering. And also it goes to the business relationship that Trump has with Russia. He insists he doesn't have loans or do business there, but his son-in-law has said that they did a lot of business with Russia. So there's all these questions out there, and there's going to be investigations about, what actually went on. So these larger questions are sort of hanging over Flynn is one thing, but there's these other questions, and certainly there may be nothing to them at all, but Flynn's actions lead to these types of questions, because what got the intelligence community onto Flynn, and I'm not saying there's not a payback by the intelligence community against the Trump administration, because they've sort of been a verbal war, but one thing that tipped the intelligence community off to what Flynn was doing was, after Obama put on the sanctions for the hacking of the election and the interference in the election, Russia didn't do anything. Usually when you kick diplomats out, such as what Obama did, and you put sanctions on, the other side does the same. And Russia said, oh, no, we're not doing that. So that's what got them looking at Flynn's interactions with the Russians.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there's a lot of potential places where all of that Democratic stuff could have come from. It really looks like they were more leaks than hacks. And we just had those 3 guys from who were IT guys, 3 brothers, happen to be Muslims, neither here nor there, who were just dismissed, that were in charge of handling the network for the Democrats in the House Intelligence Committee. Really not talked about at all, but they were summarily dismissed. There's a lot of intrigue going on here. We don't know of any business that Trump ever had in Russia. He tried to do business with them earlier on, like 10 years ago. There's no Trump hotel in Moscow or in St. Petersburg or any place else, right? I mean, he's got no properties there. Of this, we're pretty certain.
Well, this is, I mean, on the surface, yes. But some people are saying, well, his son-in-law said they did a lot of business with Russia earlier. So I don't know what that means. Certainly not hotels or whatever, but, with his name on it. But I don't know what that means. I mean, Trump says one thing and his son-in-law, Kushner, says another thing. So that's one thing that I guess they're probably going to be rooting around to see if they can, dig up any dirt there. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. The Democrats are mad about the election. And so now they're pushing, of course, for investigations into the Flynn thing and really beyond that, I think.
Yeah, something seems a bit off there for sure. But in any event,
I'm actually sorry to see Flynn go, because I think he, regardless of what you think should have happened in Obama as far as the election go, responding to the election go, I think in the long term, the U.S. really does need to improve relations with Russia. And I think Trump is right about that. And one of the reasons for that is there's a rising China, and what you need to do is have a sort of a reverse Nixon policy. In Nixon,
exactly.
Early 70s, he befriended Mao Zedong, who was a more radical communist, but China wasn't as powerful as the Soviet Union. And so the U.S. sort of triangulated there and got support from China against USSR. And now, of course, you could do the reverse, since China is the more powerful of the two countries, except in the nuclear area, and you could befriend Russia, or at least get along with them better, so as to act as a counterweight to a rising China.
Yeah, and China just so happens to be colonizing Siberia.
Right. Right. The Russians have much more reason to be scared of the Chinese than we do. We have a whole ocean separating us. And, China has not been the type of imperial power in the past that Russia has. And so there's some hope that they won't be. But the real problem between Russia and China is that they have a long border, and they had a border war in 1969. And since the late 50s, they haven't gotten along at all. And they're natural adversaries, whereas we're not necessarily a natural adversary of either one of them, because we're on the other side of the world.
Yeah, it just makes a lot of sense to ally with Russia. Our interests are much more, in the long run, conjoined against a rising China. And Putin's got to know this. But it seems like his anger towards the United States, his vitriol towards the U.S. and the West overrides his, common sense towards the long-term, good of Russia, being integrated into the West. So
yeah, well, I think Russia under Yeltsin wanted to be integrated into the West, and the United States kind of shunned them and expanded NATO both in territory and mission further east, and then from a defensive to an offensive alliance. And I think historically Russia's been invaded by many countries. The Swedes, the Poles, the Germans, the French. The Mongols twice.
The Mongol hordes, yeah.
So, the last time they got invaded, they lost 25 million people, which is staggering total. When, the Germans only lost 5 million in World War II, and they lost the war. The Russians won the war. And, that fighting there was the worst in world history. And so the Russians are very nervous about their security. And of course, that leads them to get autocratic leaders like Putin, because, you centralize power when your security's under threat. And that's why one of the reasons that Russia has always had really autocratic rulers throughout its history, because it has intrinsically bad security, unlike the United States, which has 2 ocean moats, weak and friendly neighbors, and lots of nuclear weapons. We have probably the most intrinsically secure position of any great power in world history. So, you have to, you may say, well, Putin's a nasty guy, and he is, but you don't make a paranoid country even more paranoid. And I think the NATO expansion was a factor in leading to Putin's elevation in Russia, because they were trying to go more democratic in the 90s with Yeltsin. But the U.S. wouldn't allow them into NATO or any sort of organization in Europe. And that's what you get when that happens.
Yeah, unfortunate. The failure on the part of the U.S. to see the long term, because China was already emerging and it was obvious what was going to happen. So we talk about...
In fact, the United States contradicted its own successful policy after World War II of incorporating Japan and Germany back into and they had done horrendous things, and we incorporated them back into the community of nations. But after the Cold War, we really didn't make that much of an effort to do so with Russia.
Yeah, a missed opportunity for sure. Real shame. And then the KGB takes over the country. But during the election, Hillary Clinton was obsessed over Putin's connection to Trump. I mean, every debate, that's all she talked about. And much to her ultimate demise, is I don't think the message really resonated with the public, to say the least. So we're looking at Trump's immigration policy here. So, of course, number one is his executive order barring, or at least temporarily barring, people from certain countries coming till there's extreme vetting in place, and then basically ending the refugee policy from Syria. And then also, of course, there's the wall. So what's your take on his emerging immigration policy?
Well, I think in the end, he may win in the courts, just because the courts have traditionally given the president a lot of power in immigration. Now, that's not according to what the Constitution says. The Congress is supposed to have the power. But nonetheless, the history throughout has been that the courts have and the Congress have really delegated a lot of power to the president in immigration. So I think in the courts, he may eventually come up with some kind of a victory. Now, until then, he may put out a revised order. He made a mistake. It was a really slipshod order. They included the green card people who are legitimate residents of the U.S. And if he hadn't done that, he probably wouldn't got all the protests and the there would have been some protests probably, but not to the extent, because a lot of green card people were out of the country visiting whomever, and they didn't know if they could get back, or if they were, if they wanted to go make a family visit, they couldn't go overseas and then come back. They couldn't leave because of that. So there was all sorts of problems with the green card people who are already legitimate. In other words, he was messing with legal immigration as well as illegal immigration.
The process had been followed already to grant them those rights. Same with visas as well.
Right. So I think if he would have done that, he would have had a much less of a problem. And he may come out with a new order that eliminates that problem. And that would probably be safer in the courts as well. But he likes to win, so he may continue the original order, litigating that while he comes up with the other order. But who knows what he's going to do. But I think we have to go past that. The policy itself is somewhat misguided, because I think a lot of these, there hasn't really been anybody that killed anybody from these countries. Now, there have been people that have come in and been accused of terrorism, but the last person that was killed anybody with a terrorist act from these countries was in 1980. And that was, that's the refugee category. And that was a Cuban person who I'm assuming probably wasn't Muslim. So the question is, does he have the right countries? He just took them from what Obama and the Congress had passed. And the other issue is these refugees have been really vetted to a very high degree. So I don't think the danger is quite as what is making it out to be. And I think that's where some of the courts, they won't say that, but that's why some of the courts are pushing back on him, because they just don't feel that, this does any good. Mm-hmm. And it may actually do bad, because if where you get your intelligence on terrorism is from Muslim communities, and in the United States, the Muslim communities are not the communities of Europe. They're very well integrated, and you don't want to scare them so much that they don't tell the government that there's a terrorist in their midst, if there does happen to be one. So, and a lot of these terrorists that we've seen in San Bernardino and Orlando and other places, they were already here. And so when you have a travel ban, if you're trying to ban people that are already here, it's not going to work that well. So I'm not sure this was real. I think this was more of I think Trump is trying to honor his campaign promises down to the letter, in fact. And I think probably they should have looked at it a little more closely, and they could have honored the pledge in spirit, but maybe made it a little more effective that they wanted to do something.
Well, one of the things that's distressing here, Ivan, is many of these people who do go on to commit these terror acts forget about where they're from. The FBI knows about them. The Boston terror guys, the guy in Orlando, the guy in Fort Lauderdale Airport, which I know you've been through that airport numerous times, probably as many times as I've been through it. So that resonates with you. The FBI knows about these people. They do nothing about them. I know it's a different issue. I just don't understand it when they're onto these people and they do nothing, when they're tipped off by even the Russians. And this happens over and over again to the point where it's really a pattern. And you wonder, what is the FBI's purpose if they're not going to intercede and they're warned about these dangerous individuals? The guy from Alaska there, he was Puerto Rican. He evidently converted to Islam, and he was ISIS. Somehow he was connected with them. We don't know exactly how, but he went there and said they were in his brain and talking to him in his sleep, whatever. But he was definitely connected. We saw the YouTubes, we saw his Facebook, and yet the FBI decided to do nothing about him. So keeping them out is one thing, but doing something about these people when you know about them is another. It seems like our government is wholly incapable, has no capacity to deal with these people once they know about them. So it looks like the whole fight is in shambles. The whole defense against them, is just they're incapable of protecting the country.
Well, I thought that for a long time, as you pointed out, even in 9/11, there was plenty of warnings in the system, and they just blew it. And one of the problems that they've had, I think, is that the government is so big and so unwieldy that the agencies in 9/11, a central problem was that the CIA and the FBI didn't talk to each other, and supposedly they've done something to break down that barrier a little bit. But I used to work in the intelligence community, and the agencies are very secretive, and if they have information, they really don't want to share it. And the reason that it's really sort of a weird thing is that they collect information for the sake of collecting it. Now, they'll tell you they don't do that, but if you don't share it with the operational agencies like customs or local police that can go out and arrest the guy before he shoots up the whole place, well, that's a problem. And so I thought it was ridiculous after 9/11 that they created this new Homeland Security Department, and they created this whole new, another layer of bureaucracy in the intelligence community.
Yeah, the director there of national intelligence, who seems to do nothing either. But it's just the government. I mean, it's ridiculous. They know these guys are there. They identify them. And all they have to do is look at their Facebook page. They know they're jihadis, and they're totally unwilling or unable to do anything about it. So, let's see if Trump is going to change that mindset, because it's a mindset, like you said. They collect for the sake of collecting.
They need to pare down the number of federal law enforcement agencies and pare down the number of intelligence agencies, because they're tripping over each other and they're not coordinating properly. And that was a real problem on 9/11. They never fixed it. They made it worse by creating a new layers of bureaucracy and creating the Homeland Security Department, creating the Director of National Intelligence, and it just piled another bureaucracy in both cases on existing bureaucracies. And so, and I think the other problem is that you've hit on square on the head, is I think our policy has to be focused on the people that are actually doing the crimes, rather than these categories of people from this country or that country, or this religion or that religion, because you get into problems where it's counterproductive. We depend a lot on overseas intelligence with Muslim countries. Some of these countries where these people come out of are US allies, like on 9/11, 14 of the 19 hijackers, 15 of the 19 were Saudi, 4 were Egyptian, I think. So
Saudis,
from those countries, and of course, those are both US allies. So if we make all these countries mad by Muslim bans or whatever, it's really kind of counterproductive. I think you're right. We got to focus on the people that are actually doing these things and actually have agencies. And I always thought, these terrorist groups are very agile. And in fact, if you're a lone wolf terrorist, you're even the most agile. You may not be the most competent, but at any rate, these groups or individuals are very agile. We have these humongous bureaucracies that are used to following around spies from other countries. Like the FBI is set up to do counterintelligence against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Well, these terrorist groups are much different than that.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're just, it's frustrating to watch when they've got them in their sights. They not only let the guy go, they give him back his gun. I mean, what are they thinking? Let's see a little accountability, and let's see the investigation of why that occurred and why these people fell through the cracks. That's what I'd like to see. Anyway.
Well, also, I think you're absolutely right with the accountability. There's so many instances where the law enforcement people were watching them, or they were tailing them, or they arrested them and let them go. Where's the accountability after these types of occurrence? Who gets fired? Nobody ever gets fired from anything anymore.
They get promoted.
Government, when something like this happens, and you say, well, this guy should have been picked up or, questioned a little more, or so at least something. But nobody ever seems to get fired for not, or demoted for not doing that.
Yeah, it's like the VA. Hey, same exact thing, but that's our government. So maybe, like you said, 17 agencies. We probably don't need 17 agencies. Maybe we could get by with 4 or 5. And then everybody's mission's much more defined, clear, and they know exactly what they should be doing and what they need to do. And then when something screws up, who the accountable parties are, and they can be brought to bear. Hey, Ivan, always a pleasure. Where's the best place to find your work, your articles, frequent articles, and what's your latest book?
Well, my latest book is The Failure of Counterinsurgency. And our website at the Independent Institute is www.independent.org. And if you want the book, you can just order it on Amazon.
All right. And go to Amazon. And any questions, comments, send me an email, kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @KerryLutz, and Facebook page is Financial Survival Network. Ivan, have a great day, and we will talk to you again soon.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
With trying to improve relations with Russia. I mean, you can, and some Republicans do, but I think, everybody thinks that they ought to make at least one last attempt to improve relations with Russia. So that's not really the issue. And he was a champion of that policy, but he may have gone too far in discussions with the Russians before he took off. He took office with Trump. In other words, he was representing the president-elect rather than the president. And that's where he ran into problems because the government the United States is supposed to have one government at a time. And also the second issue is he was doing anything wrong, but it's the real question, the larger question here, which just leads to, unfortunately for Trump, is because of this hacking allegation is, was there a quid pro quo, a wink and a nudge saying, well, we can't hack into the Democratic computers, but you can, Russia. And if you do, we'll take off the sanctions when we get into office. That's the question that everybody's really wondering. And also it goes to the business relationship that Trump has with Russia. Does he have? He insists he doesn't have. He also apparently lied to Vice President Pence and maybe other administration officials about, what he was doing.
Yeah, you got to wonder, at the very least, that's exceedingly poor judgment, especially when we know from Snowden that everything is getting recorded. Certainly any conversations between the U.S. and Russia are getting recorded here.
And he was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So he was a higher up in the U.S. intelligence community. So he, above all people, should have known that, right? So I'm not sure. Maybe he didn't think.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today is February 14th, 2017. Well, we just got the news that Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who is the President's National Security Advisor, just stepped down. And who's coming next? Well, there was a temporary appointment of his deputy. We don't know who the permanent person will be yet, but here to discuss it is Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow and Director, Center on Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute. And Ivan, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Hey, so this whole Flynn imbroglio, it just started kind of from before his appointment. And it just kept growing and growing. And finally, I guess he just became too big a liability and he had to go, right?
Right. Well, I think, you can't argue